Hey, Greg. Uh, Soothing the Nine Types of Fear.
Uh-huh.
Awesome class. And then the study group Monday night was pretty amazing
Oh,
last
good.
night. Uh,
Yeah, we just tried to make, I didn't even do like the little affirmations. I just thought like let's just fire through it real quick and just do one cycle so that, you could sit and do it right before you go to bed or, right before you do a meditation. And, it's still 45 minutes to an hour, but it's still a way to fire through it kind of quickly.
and so I have a series of related comments.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
great.
so when we did the study group last night,
Uh-huh.
I did not get tired at all.
Right.
Is that normal versus the class where tiredness was the norm?
Yeah, the class you're working on a lot deeper, and a lot of times you'll kind of do it in waves where, a lot of times the first time, second time, it'll be really super intense. And then you do it a few times after that, and it's just like drinking a glass of water where you're like, yeah, feels good. I took the edge down, I kind of changed things a little bit. And, the thing with like fear is there's a lot of layers and it's tied to like a way of thinking. And the theory is like by going through and calming all these things down with the fear mechanisms, like we did last night and in that fear day, you know, um, you're calming down a lot of responses and you're calming down potential responses as you go more in the intuitive mind. In the weekends where we do things with the brain waves, we're kind of changing how our brains like process that information. And then, we have that free class coming up, Lymphatic 5, where it's sleep. Sleep, it's not necessarily going into fear, but you could say we're going to address things that are precursors to fear in that Lymphatic 5 class, like these like kinds of agitations that come from our negative experiences or people being hostile towards us or just feeling out of sorts. It starts this kind of chain reaction. And so each piece kind of contributes to these responses. And in the old days, I go back to the pain class. Like when I first taught that pain class to a bunch of nurse practitioners, the booklet was nowhere near as sophisticated. I didn't have Letty helping back then, but still it was over 200 pages. And
Oh,
it was
wow.
just too much information to digest. And so even this idea with like sometimes like fears and stresses and things, there's like these layers of the onion. And a lot of times we see like a particular layer, we go, oh, I'm gonna treat that. But there's like this like chain reaction that you're addressing. And so a lot of times when I teach like a subject like this, several of the classes that are in the vicinity of that, like a little bit before, a little bit after, they're still tying into some of those mechanisms. Like
Okay.
the one we're doing in the weekend's going to tie into it with you're basically kind of changing how your brain responds to external stimuli and how you process it. And it's almost like turning these little knobs to just change your reaction. And man, those brainwaves are intense. I did them myself last night, and I was pretty done for the day. Like I still was like, I'm gonna do this for a little bit. And it shifted me so much where I was like, I'm just gonna lean into this and let this sink deeper. And the thing with the Lymphatic 5 thing, we're going to go into the steps of sleep, but we're also going to look at precursors of what sometimes doesn't allow you to go to sleep, like some of the things that start agitating you so that you don't go to sleep. And different than things that we've talked about in the past, yes, but no. Like we're doing it in a little bit more systematic way of doing it. But when you kind of tie together some of the pieces from that Lymphatic 5 and the brainwaves with the fear, it's a really potent way to treat the fear responses. And when you calm those down, it's really amazing to me how you can just release something. Like it becomes much easier to release something. It becomes easier to like let go of something in the energy body. Like it's not even so much emotionally, mentally. It's like your physiology just goes, and just like gives it up. Like, you know, it just stops trying to maintain that. And you know, those fear mechanisms, those fears that we addressed, you know, those are just the top 9. Like they're significantly more, but I mean, they're a bit more esoteric, or they're real specific to certain areas. They're not like everyday kind of things. By going through and addressing those on a regular basis, I mean, it's a game changer for your brain. And then you combine it with like brain waves and working the directions. And you know, the thing that I did last night was I did the brain waves, and then I did the directions, you know, the directions like how we played with during the weekend. And I was done for the night. Like, you know, it was a little hour session, and I was pretty cooked, you know. And so we have all kinds of weird tensions in our body that we don't know are there until they're gone. And, you know, the thing that's nice about those 9 different fears is it's a way to treat them, but it's also a way to explore those areas. So you can see like, oh, I have these fears because they are in the intuitive mind. They are a bit more like unconscious, subconscious, whatever you want to call it. And so a lot of times we're not even really aware that they're there. And then when you calm them down, you're like, oh, God, I feel so much better. Like I feel so much better, you know?
So a lot of what you said leads to these other questions.
Mm-hmm.
I have, well, first off, a question about types of fears. The
Mm-hmm.
fear of missing out, where does that fit?
Yeah, fear of missing out. Yeah, if I go back and look at my notes, I think there is like something there's a specific one, but if we look at that 9, you could probably still treat it within that 9. Let me look at this real quick. I want to say it's probably under the rejection. Like I would say either rejection or failure would probably hit it. Because, you know, another one, like when I was evaluating them, another one is fear of change. Like, but when I looked at my notes, it's there, but these other ones are a bit more substantial.
Yeah, I thought the one I felt closest was social anxiety.
Yeah.
But I see all 3 of them, but it just didn't hit me which it was, if it was one in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that helps.
Social anxiety, I mean, here's the thing with fears is a lot of times the fears overlap. And so like fear of missing out, like say you're sitting in a group and you're meditating and you're like, oh, I spaced out and I didn't do da, versus some social situation, still missing out, but kind of different kinds of fears. That could be actually a social anxiety, like, you know, not getting the opportunity or not getting engaged, or you know, it starts to go into a rejection thing if you go too far down that. But that's why it's like when we were doing the class, it's really good just to fire through all of them rather than trying to identify which one you are. Because a lot of times they're so layered and overlapping that you just have fear mechanisms. You know, it's just.
Yesterday when we were going through it, there was stuff going on in the house, and as my body tensed up, there was this, fear of missing out of what's going on elsewhere in the house while I'm doing this.
Right.
So I knew it was an appropriate time, and I knew it was getting cleaned up, but it was like, is that really in here? Right. Or is that another one? When are we doing the next 20? You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure. You know, I played with the idea of making that a 2-day class, but I was like, it could be a little intense in 2 days. And then I was like, I don't know if we do the other ones like in a study group, or maybe we just do a part 2. We could do a part 2. very easily. And because I was looking at my
There's-
notes, I said, "Oh, there's a few." I went and looked at my notes. There's like another 15 or 20. Like
Right.
there's a bunch.
Yeah, I know whatever other fears are within me and out there
Mhm.
aren't going to hit me as hard because I've already gone through these 9.
Mhm.
I've experienced that change. And
Yeah.
so it's like I'm no longer afraid of any other fears that come up.
Right.
So during the class and during the study group, when we did the section on existential, I
Mhm.
had this thought come in of like, what's the cleanup at the end of this process? And I know during the study group, we did some chanting at the end as sort of a cleanup.
Mhm.
I'm not a great chanter, so I don't know that that applies. And I don't
Yeah.
know how to do that for my clients. What else could we do in there, sort of like an ending?
Yeah. So you can always do something on the brain, something on the solar plexus, but the big one is usually the basic. You could go
Okay.
through and do some sort of cleanup on the basic. Sometimes the issue is that sometimes the thing that needs to be cleaned up doesn't really come up for about a day or two. And so
Uh,
you could still try to clean it up, but when you hit something deep, like you'll feel fine, and then all of a sudden you feel a wave of something kind of come out, and it's like, ugh, like that feels weird, or somebody's mad at me or something, and it's really just a bunch of stuff coming to the surface, and it only lasts for usually maybe a few minutes to a couple hours. But cleanup with that could be frankincense, galbanum, palo santo, um, charcoal root cleanser, just things to just keep it moving. Even like some hyssop. I like the idea of frankincense or palo santo for that. Galbanum can be too if it's like something that's like a trauma or something painful. But most times you're just cleaning something up that's like in the basic chakra. If you wanted to be fancy, you could use like tobacco, or even spikenard would be good. Um, aloes could be good.
okay.
Things that are very make the basic a little bit more flexible. The angel sandalphon, sabriel, um, sandalwood. Sandalwood would be good. Frankincense and Palo Santo are a little bit more like, where the other ones can be a little bit subtle, and, they're good, but sometimes you just need to get in there and just really rip the weeds out. You know what I mean? Like there's times where you go and in the garden, you gently kind of pick a few weeds here and there, and you're like, it's all looking pretty good. Sometimes you got to break out that little hula hoe or whatever it is and just go at it. Palo Santo and frankincense are a little bit more like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of my clients at her last session about a month
Mhm.
ago
Mhm.
made this very casual statement of, I've led this fear-based life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, she's the next one to do this
Yeah.
class with. So I need to take the class so I can do it with her on her next session.
Yeah.
And I've been working with her for years. So yes, there's definite fear patterns within her life. Should I just do, we have the luxury of having a 2-hour session if we
Yeah.
would like.
I would do the quick thing we did last night, and then do like a healing session on her. And the thing that I would say about that too, fear is fascinating to me, by the way. Like I am totally just super fascinated by it. Just like clinically, you start looking at things and you're just like, man, I could just look at that and just the mechanisms and like the dance that it does and the psyche and then the physiology. And when you have a client say something like that, it could be because of past experiences. It could be because of trauma. It could be because of all that. But anytime you're going to step out of the box, it's going to engage a fear. And
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that the situation is bad. A lot of times it actually means it's good, but you're doing something different. And anytime you're doing something different, it can evoke like a fear response. And so, you know, in my early days, I tried to avoid fear like the plague, but I was just no getting away from it. And then over a period of time, I started realizing I'm afraid of the things that are even positive that are coming into my life. Like I can tell when I'm on the right track because I'm a little bit afraid. And it almost becomes this little bit of an indicator where if it's causing you a little bit of a fear response, you have to go, okay, am I just freaked out because it's the past or there's potential of harm? Or if it's a little bit more subtle, but it's just like you can't get it like get it out of your head. You know, it's because you're onto something, you're engaging something. And you know, I started looking at this because I remember saying this to even Master Choa way back in the day, is I would say, you know, if you look at somebody's energy body when they do like a deep meditation, like when they do meditation on the soul, they have this like beautiful experience. The upper centers get all big. You know, the emotional body, the heart can get big and all this. And I go, but if you look at the physiology, the adrenals start to kick in, and like there starts to be like a little bit of a resistance or a little bit of a fear response. And you know, he listened and he kind of goes, yeah, that's natural, that's normal. And so, you know, we didn't really have a big long conversation about it, but I was like, that's the stumbling block even when you're doing deep meditation, is you have this beautiful experience and then you're like, yeah, but I'm not doing that anymore. And I think of my very first experience of meditation. You know, I was a teenager and I sat down and, you know, I was just following something I read in some like Buddhist book or something. And there was an explosion of light and I like freaked out. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what that was. I'm never doing that again. Never. Like never, never, never. And then so many years later, I was like, oh, if I could only have the explosion of light, if I could only, like, you know, like, because it so freaked me out that later when I would meditate, it just like was me like this, but with my eyes closed. Like there was no expansion. And I had to really work through that. And it took years. But the idea is that, like, if you think about, let's set aside even situations where it's about, okay, I'm stepping out and doing something more successful, or I'm doing something that's really supporting my self-esteem, or I'm doing some spiritual practice, and the more that I connect to the deity, I feel a little bit of a fear response. Even if you set all those things aside, look at two people when they're falling in love, right? You can tell almost how intense the love is, because at first they love each other and everything, and then it's like, you're gonna hurt me, da, 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 da. There comes this point where there's a little bit of conflict there for a little bit, and it's because you're breaking out and you're starting to experience something so genuine that there starts to be this weird response in the situation where it kind of freaks each of them out, or at least one of them, right? And so not every time, but a lot of times you have this little thing where you have to kind of work that out. And in therapy, I used to call it riding the wild horses. You got to ride the wild horse for a little bit. Like you just got to calm all that down. Like you really like the person, you got to ride that wild horse for a little bit. And even there, you can see like people's like their stuff, their past traumas, their past, you know, concerns, their fears, all those things start coming up, but it's because it's genuine. Like, you know, you're experiencing something that's outside your senses, or your story that you have in the head, or the projection of this is what's going to happen over the next 5 or 10 years. You know, I remember talking to a CEO friend of mine, and he was like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I laughed, and I was like, I have no idea. Like, you know, I have like goals, but that they're going to pan out. Like I set the goals, but who knows what's going to happen? Like, and I was like, I don't want to be so rigid in the things that I think about the future that I dismiss enjoying the journey through those 5 years or doing something that's an opportunity because I've got this preconceived idea in my head. I think it's good to have goals, but at the same time, it's good to be open to, life. Like things happen, opportunities happen, people come into your life, different scenarios going to play out. So
I'm laughing quite a bit at what you're saying because in this client's case, she definitely has a vision for where she wants things to be in 2 to 5 years.
yeah,
And she's manifesting all these experiences, but her first reaction is always no.
yeah.
And then after she gets through about 12 to 24 hours of no, then she starts saying, now, why did I say no?
Right.
And so she talks to me or someone else, and they just give her different perspectives on it. And she goes, oh, I was supposed to do that. And here's why. And here's the fears that are keeping me from it. And so she's very aware of what's going on. That fear of the positive things is
It's a real thing. It's a super real thing. And then if there was reinforcements, there can be reinforcements when you were younger that, like, if you did well, that it was not readily accepted by, the family or your peers or, people get weird, people get competitive. It can be different for boys and girls or men and women. Women, like if you watch them grow up, all the girls are playing games where they're like equal. And if one of them starts to excel, it makes them stand out a little bit, and so that can make them feel awkward. And then boys, it's just you start to do well, and boys are like, you perform and you produce a result, and if you don't, you either have to adjust or you change the game or whatever. And so a lot of times it's competitiveness from the peers, so kind of the same idea, but the mechanisms can be a little bit different. And I mean, it's not always a male female thing, but if you just look at it for like how little kids play and interact, I think that's actually changed quite a bit now. Like when I was growing up, it was a little bit clearer like that. Now the boundaries between male and female are not quite the same. And so it could go either way with stuff like that. But still, being successful, doing well is not always something that's nurtured in a person. In fact, sometimes it's like oppressed or repressed or whatever word you want to use there.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but
it does. So my next question